Comenzamos. Buenas tardes a todos. El título de esta mesa redonda es New Directions for the Teaching of Writing, o sea, las nuevas direcciones, las nuevas tendencias en la enseñanza de la escritura. Y estamos esperando que se conecte David Russell, pero si no lo hace, vamos a trabajar con la doctora Nancy Nelson y la doctora Angier. La doctora Angier dirige el Centro Sweetland de la Escritura y codirige el doctorado conjunto de Inglés y Educación de la Universidad de Michigan. Pero además, hay algo muy interesante. Ella obtuvo el reconocimiento de Richard Mead por sus investigaciones acerca de la Asociación Nacional de Estudios sobre Mujeres. Angier también ha trabajado con grupos de mujeres que se dedican a la lectura, o que tienen como clubs de mujeres donde trabajan la lectura y la escritura. ¿Podemos comenzar con Angier? Es un honor. Discúlpenme. Ya tenemos a David Russell, entonces vamos a empezar con él. Esperamos que esta vez no tengamos problemas de comunicación. David, can you start?
Yes, I sure will. I want to focus on technology innovations for just minutes. One of the most important, I think, worldwide is the cell phone, the portable phone, as a means of teaching at a distance and of students connecting with one another. And in fact, there's been very interesting experimentation around the world in the last few years on using cell phones, which are accessible most students, all students, and teachers, tech students with assignments that are responses to the other students' comments, peer response. These are often around reading they do, so more writing to read it, with stories, paraphrase, synthesis, or more open tasks by group prompts. Another, at the very other scale, is a website called LabWrite, for ones that each of a specific genre. And the LabWrite is fascinating because it teaches the genre of the laboratory report in chemistry specifically, but it is also the only controlled comparison study that I know of thus far that has proven successful in teaching students write a new genre, that is to say, first language adults to write a new genre in the university. And what I like especially about this study is that it's available to students in chemistry courses 24/7, and it was not evaluated in this controlled comparison study on the basis of how well the students wrote, but it was evaluated on the basis of how well the students learn the chemistry concepts, learn the scientific method, and their attitude toward laboratory work. Let me mention only two others briefly. And these are interesting because, again, they connect students with students around writing to learn. These are peer review websites, and they're quite interesting because the students read and respond to each other's writing, which is all organized online, but they do so based on criteria that the teacher has laid out in advance. And the students' responses then are based on their evaluation of benchmark pieces of writing. And these, again, in some very good studies, have been shown to be effective in a lot of ways for teaching writing to learn. Those are, just for your reference, Calibrated Peer Review, which is free around the world in its earlier version, without the bells and whistles. And the other one is called SWORD, Students Writing and Revision. I can't remember the acronym, but if you Google SWORD, SWORD, writing Pittsburgh, you'll get it. Let me just stop there, because I know that Anne and Nancy have much to say, and because I would like to hear responses from the room.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, David. So now, okay then. Ahora va a presentar la doctora Nancy Nelson. Ella trabaja temas de lectura y escritura, pero muy relacionadas con lo intercultural. Ella ha tenido experiencias de seminarios en Italia, en España, en Noruega, en Nueva Zelanda y Costa Rica. Por favor.
Bye-bye.
We'll hear you, David.
Yes, you will.
Well, what I'm going to do, I've got something prepared here. Can you hear me? We're having a technology problem here.
Okay. What I want to do is I kind of want to, my topic is reading, writing connections. And those of you who were here this morning, I see that that's kind of where my heart is. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what we know about reading and writing practices, processes, and then think about the kinds of teaching that we might be doing. So I want to kind of review, to begin with, what we know about reading and writing connections. First of all, from a cognitive perspective. We had the cognitive revolution in the 1970s, and we had a great deal of cognitive oriented research into reading and writing, and people became aware that reading and writing are not so different, that we have hybrid acts of literacy where people read and write both in performing those tasks. And now we have a camera too. Thank you. All right, we're all set. Okay. And so we had this research into reading and writing and looking at various kinds of connections. We also had a great deal of research into the writing process, and a lot of that, used protocol analysis and various kinds of process tracing approaches. The cognitive work continues. I'm always really impressed with the work that the European researchers are doing in studying the writing process. They're using a lot of approaches like keystroke logging now, to get more detail about the writing process and translating a lot of that into instruction. So we learned about reading and writing connections, that both are meaning-making, both are generative, and that there are transformations that occur. We also learned that there are common knowledges that are used in both reading and writing, and I've got a list of those up there. The basic linguistic knowledge, knowledge about text, procedural knowledge, metacognition. So all of that knowledge that we were gaining helped us learn more about both of these processes. At about the same time that we had the cognitive revolution, we also had the social turn. So we had kind of a perfect storm there, because we began to get good research going on into social aspects of writing. And to get you thinking about that, we can look at the rhetorical triangle, which goes way back to classical rhetoric. And that's the way we thought about authors relating to audiences, and this being an important part of the social aspect of writing. So we have writers intending their text to be written for audiences. In descriptions of writing, from classical rhetoric to current conceptions, attention has gone to the impact of audience awareness, audience adaptation, the appeals, ethos, logos, pathos, and so on. One interesting thing I think that came out of a lot of this social process research is that not only do writers read their readers, but readers read their writers. And this is one of the directions that I think we need to go in. We need to focus more on this kind of this discovery, really, that expert readers do a lot of thinking about their audiences. They do this kind of rhetorical reading, trying to figure out, what it is that the writer is doing to them, the motives that the writer has. And so we have the research of Hassan Flower and some wonderful work in history by Sam Weintraub. I think Elizabeth mentioned him yesterday. And then Hunt and Viapon's point-driven reading. So we have that. And then I want to mention this is a little dated, but I think this is kind of a new direction here in thinking about this reader-writer social connection. This was a student of mine at LSU, her dissertation. And there had been all of that research focused writers, thinking about their audiences and adapting their writing for their audience. And so we had that research, but we didn't really look at writers' intentions relative to audiences' reception. And she did a study that looked at both of these together. She had a class of students read a novel titled Fielder's Choice. It was about baseball. And it was written, this was at Louisiana State, it was written by a Louisiana author who lived nearby. He happened to be an attorney. And so she interviewed him to get his intentions, what he wanted his readers to get from this book, what his points were, as he made various decisions in his writing. And she also got the students' responses to the text as they read it and looked at those together, and then had the author and the students meet to talk about this, which is very interesting to see, because these students, when they were thinking about this author writing this book for people like them, they were asking very sophisticated kinds of questions. Like, why did you use a pretend audience? Why did you not use chronological order? It made it harder for me to follow it. So there were questions like that. And then it was interesting to get his response to it too, because he was very pleased when they got some of the kind of complicated ideas that he had in there, but he was sort of troubled when some features of his writing, created difficulties for them and didn't work. So I think, I'm not saying that everyone should get an author, and have students do this, but I think that's one thing that we need to do to kind of foster this reading-writing connection, is to get our students to think more about the writers of the text that they read, and do more of a rhetorical kind of reading, and of course continue with the emphasis on audience. Another aspect, social aspect, well, these are two approaches. They're not all that new, but they do seem to work. The questioning the author, which is an approach developed by Elizabeth Beck, and the author's chair by Donald Graves. These are for young children. Okay, another kind of social connection that was made in connecting reading and writing is the collaborative aspects of writing, and learning about different patterns of co-authorship. And it's not always in pairs, it's sometimes in groups, and the patterns can be parallel, sequential, reciprocal, or sometimes, and I don't always like doing this, but one person writing for a whole team. And then, of course, there's response, which I mentioned this morning, so I'll skip over that. But collaboration and understanding text. We're giving a lot of attention now to discussion of text, and I'm citing another doctoral student of mine. This one was at Corpus Christi, and he did a really wonderful study that I think connected reading and writing, because he had children. These were children grades 1 through 4 in an after-school discussion group talk about these texts, and they were trying to get other people to agree with them about the meaning of this text that they were reading. There were different books. And so they were negotiating in the real sense of giving and taking. They were having to give some things up in order to kind of win in this. And he discovered that these young children used strategies that we would consider to be rhetorical. They were using some kind of, even the first grader were sophisticated kinds of rhetorical strategies to try to convince others that their particular perspective was the best one. So I think this is connecting reading and writing through looking at rhetorical strategies that are used in both processes. The last point, it has to do with, that's just a summary there. Last point has to do with the cultural connections. We've been talking a lot about genres, and so I'm really not going to go into that very much, because you heard me talk about, or some of you heard me talk about genres this morning. But I mentioned there the these practices that we consider to be genres, activities, but also this notion of remediation is very important. And I think this is a new approach in writing, teaching students how to remediate something, how to take it from one medium and make it work in another one, taking a written text, turning it into video, or vice versa. So that's also a new direction. So the point that I wanted to make here about the sociocultural connections are that we are dealing with practices and genres, emphasis on activity and doing, context, and multiple literacies, and identity. I'd let you just kind of puzzle about that. But that's kind of how I see all of this working in terms of reading and writing and people forming their identities through the works that they use, other people's writings that they use as they create their own, sometimes citing them, sometimes not, but creating an authoring identity that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. You already introduced.
David, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Oh, I'm so glad. Okay, so I'm going to pick up where David and Nancy have left off and talk about where I see writing instruction going today. And the way I see it is writing instruction is sitting in the middle of what we might think of as a kind of perfect storm of forces coming at it. Perhaps heading the list is the topic of assessment. And what I'm going to do is, these are sort of the big forces that I see, and then I'm going to take each one in turn and sort of talk it through to say what I mean. So I'm just going to give you the overview at this point. But I purposefully chose this sort of circular design because I didn't want to suggest hierarchy. I don't think that assessment is necessarily any more important than technology, for example. But I think that we do need to think about all of these things when we think about writing instruction. So assessment certainly is one of the things that I think is at the center of forces pushing on writing instruction, and it is shaping the way writing instruction is going. Certainly technology is another one of those, and I was delighted, David, that you got us started thinking in that direction, because I certainly see that as a very major force operating on the way that we're going to be teaching writing. Another one is the term transfer. And transfer is an interesting word because it obviously means two kinds of things. It means transfer as in students transfer from one institution to another, from high school to college, or from, in our case in the United States, often from a community college to a two-year college to a four-year college. Transfer also is a very big topic in writing instruction because there's also the issue of transfer of learning. And so those two things, I think, are part of what we need to think about also in terms of writing. And again, I'll have more to say about that. Another force, I think, that we need to contend with is the relation between K through 12 and higher education. because very often I think in higher education there's this game blame, or this blame game. It's their fault. They didn't teach them in high school, and so we have these problems. Or the high school teachers say the elementary schools didn't teach them, so they have these problems. And I don't think that's a very productive relationship, and it certainly has a lot to do with the way that we think about the relation between K through 12 and higher education. And finally, another topic that I think has bearing is the whole question of genre, and I'm delighted that Nancy in particular has gotten us thinking already about genre, not text types genre, but genre as social action, as David certainly talked about this morning as well. So those are the things that I think are all operating in this sphere that we call writing instruction. And now what I'd like to do is unpack them. So when we talk about assessment, there is a kind of ideal of assessment. If you've been reading in the literature at all, there's a good deal, again in the U.S. context, there's been a good deal of conversation about the importance of assessment being locally based, locally developed, that it be rhetorically focused, that it be paying attention to genre and to rhetoric, that it be connected to instruction, that it not simply be assessment for assessment's sake, but that there be a feedback loop between assessment and what we can then do to improve our teaching. That's sort of the ideal world. Unfortunately, none of us lives in an ideal world. And in fact, assessment is being used in a variety of, I would argue, punitive ways and ways that are often having effects of narrowing the curriculum. Again, we can talk more about that. Because I think assessment drives the curriculum. Show me any teacher whose student is going to have a test, whatever the test is, that teacher is going to teach to the test. And so whatever the assessment is, that assessment is going to drive what happens to the curriculum. So to give you a specific example, in the United States right now, if students are applying to college, they're taking either the SAT or the ACT, which are both standardized tests that college students are expected to take. Each of them requires students to write what is in effect an impromptu essay. In one case, they're allowed 20 minutes, and in the other case, they're allowed 25 minutes. So, as you might imagine, the curriculum, particularly in the last couple of years of high school, gives a lot of attention to that kind of writing, which is certainly one useful kind of writing, but it's by no means the only, nor I would argue the most important kind of writing, yet it's driving the curriculum in most secondary schools. Another thing that I think assessment brings into the equation is the need to show value. Because why are we being pressed? And again, I'm speaking out of the U.S. context, where we have had an explosion of high-stakes testing, and much of it has focused on writing. And behind that are a set of questions of value. That is, are parents getting their money's worth for the tuition that they are paying for their students to go to college? At my university, it's a very expensive proposition to go to the University of Michigan, and so parents rightly are saying, is it worth all that money? And so what value is attached to the education that our students are getting? And one of the big ways that value is being measured is in writing assessment. In the United States, we have something called the College Learning Assessment, which is basically a very fancy writing test. It's all about how students can demonstrate capacities that they have learned, but it's really they're asked to do this in writing. And it's precisely about demonstrating the value of the education that they've had. Another force that's also an assessment force, again in the States, is something called the Common Core State Standards. Some of you may have heard about No Child Left Behind, which was legislation passed in 2000-2001. That legislation was responsible for a great increase in high-stakes testing. What the Common Core standards are aiming to do, and I should say that every state except Texas, where Nancy lives, and Alaska, every state has signed on to this for reasons, there are political reasons around this, and I would be happy to tell you, but it's not probably very interesting to you. But at any rate, the Common Core standards are just that. The idea is to create a set of standards that will be adhered to by all states, all schools, and then the idea is to build a curriculum out of that and an assessment. And so again, that's having tremendous pressure on writing instruction. Finally, the whole issue of machine scoring. Increasingly, again in the US context, the big testing companies, specifically ACT and the Educational Testing Service, are moving toward increased use of computers to grade, to evaluate student writing. And that too is a pressure on writing instruction. If students know, as they often do now, that their work is being read not by a human being but by a machine, what difference is that going to make in the way that they respond to writing, and better yet, how is it going to influence teacher instruction? So those are some of the things that I think assessment is setting loose. When we turn to the issue of technology, and again, thank you, David, for really setting that topic up, and I'd like to build on one of the things that you were saying. It seems to me that part of what we're talking about when we bring technology into the discussion of writing instruction is new genres. We're asking students to write blogs. We're asking them to tweet. We're asking them to, in some cases, move into genres that we don't even yet have names for. But that's one of the effects, I think, of technology. And I don't want us to forget at the same time that this isn't just a question of using the technology. There's also a rhetorical dimension. How many of you have ever seen a really bad PowerPoint? I certainly have. I would argue that that's a rhetorical problem, and that with technology come new genres, and with that also come rhetorical problems, and that's another thing that has bearing on the way we think about teaching writing. Nancy has talked a good deal about the reading-writing relationship, and that's certainly an important thing to think about. I'd like to complicate or add to that thinking to say that I think for a very long time, in the U.S. context, I can't speak for the Mexican one, but in the U.S. context, there has been a kind of moral authority attached to reading. Reading is a good thing. In the colonial period, it was a good thing to learn to read so that you could read the Bible and be a religious, moral person. And that has carried through. I often, in my classes, will ask students to talk about their memories of reading, and they're all wonderful, warm memories. My parents read to me, snuggling up next to somebody and being read to, reading myself, lying in bed, loving to read. When I ask them about writing, they're usually very different memories, often writing as punishment. I will not talk out in class, I will not talk out in class, write it 100 times. The sort of difficulty that people experience with writing, being punished, having red marks put all over their writing. It's a very different experience, and it has none of that moral authority that reading has had for a very long time. However, what is happening is that if you look at what's going on in our culture, there was a report, again, in U.S. context, the National Endowment for the Arts did a study and found, to their dismay and mine, that people simply are not reading as much as they once did. What they buried in that report on page 61 was a significant uptick in the amount of writing that people are doing. And if you look even more recently than that at studies, there's no question that, again, as related to technology, when we look at kids who are writing with their thumbs or on a keyboard, they are doing a tremendous amount of writing. If we think about the transformation of our economy into an information economy, It's about writing. And so one of the things that I think is in process of happening is that writing is moving into the more dominant position in the U.S. context, and reading is being shifted into a somewhat less dominant position. Another thing that technology brings us are electronic portfolios. Many of us have used portfolios for a long time in writing instruction. Now they are becoming something that we can use electronically, and I'll be talking more about that actually in my next talk. But that's something that I think too has a lot of bearing on the way we think about writing instruction. So genre studies, I think I don't need to rehearse as much here. Certainly we're not talking about text types, we're talking about genre as social action. One of the things that I think has bearing on writing instruction, in addition to everything else that's been mentioned, is that I think that genre studies gives us a way back to something that we have not done very well in writing instruction for some time, which is to pay attention to the sort of meso level of syntax and even the sentence level of language. Because, as Amy Devitt has said, as soon as you start thinking about genre in the ways that we are thinking about when we talk about rhetorical genre studies, we're really looking at language and the kinds of rhetorical moves that are made, often at the level of sentence or a few sentences, that make a piece work as a genre. Again, it's rhetorical because genres are by nature rhetorical. And finally, I would argue that genre studies gives us ways of thinking differently about assessment. And again, I'll talk more about that next hour. But it seems to me that if we believe that assessment ought to be locally based, that it ought to be grounded in the context of a particular institution or a particular school or a particular community, that as soon as we start talking about that, we start talking about rhetoric and we start talking about genre, and those things have bearing then on assessment. As I mentioned earlier, another thing that I think influences instruction is this relationship between K through 12 and higher education, and assessment is certainly central in that, because for all the reasons that I've already enumerated, as soon as you have a test, you have people teaching to it, and we know that every state in the United States has a series of not one but multiple high-stakes writing tests, nearly all of them, virtually all of which are impromptu writing. So assessment is at the secondary level very much about short, on-the-spot kind of writing. And then students get to higher education and they're being asked to do something quite different. They're being asked to write extended pieces of prose where they make complicated arguments. And in my experience as a writing teacher, I find that many students have great difficulty with that, not because they're not smart, not because they're not good students, but because they have simply not had that kind of experience in high school writing. And so we need to think about how the assessment practices at the secondary level have bearing on the kinds of students that then show up in higher education. Similar to genres, again, in my context, there's something called the 5-paragraph theme, which means an introduction, 3, as my students call them, body paragraphs, and a conclusion. And that becomes a kind of formula that students are very comfortable writing, and it's particularly good for the kind of thing that they're being asked to do, that sort of short, impromptu writing. When they get to the university and they're asked to write an extended argument, an evidence-based argument, academic prose, those are very different genres, and many students don't have any repertoire. They know one thing. They know this formulaic writing, and they need tremendous help in broadening that. So again, in conversations between K through 12 and college, I think we need to raise questions about genres and the kinds of genres that people are writing and how we can facilitate communication between them. the whole continuity of literacy learning, that the kind of writing that students do in first grade has bearing on the kind of writing that they're going to do in 6th grade or 9th grade or 12th grade or on into higher education, that literacy isn't something that you learn once for all. We are all, I would argue, learning writers. I don't know about all of you. I mean, I write a lot, I've published a lot, I have a lot of books and articles and so forth, but I am still a person who is learning to write. I belong to a writing group, and every time I'm going to send something out for publication, I make sure that my colleagues have read it and responded to it, and they always help me make it better. It's not because I'm not a good writer, it's that that's the nature of writing. We are always improving, and I think we need to help our students understand that and help the world understand that so that when the professor, as I often encounter, someone in sociology at my university will say, "You didn't teach those students how to write in first-year writing," my answer is, that's not my job, that's your job. You are supposed to teach them how to write in sociology because they are learning sociology and they are learning to write in sociology at the same time. Those things go together. And finally, the whole issue of metacognition. One of the things that we have learned in studies of transfer, and I'll say more about that in a minute, is the importance of metacognition. We all know that one of the reasons that we teachers are so smart is because we get to do everything twice. We get to learn something ourselves, and then we get to teach someone else, and in that process we are going through a kind of metacognition, which means we're learning it twice, and that's a very good way to learn. And finally, this issue of transfer, and as I said at the outset, transfer cuts two ways. That is, on the one hand, it's the bodies, the students who move from grade to grade, from high school to college, across disciplines. All of those kinds of body moves are one kind of transfer, but then related to that are the transfer of learning questions, and what is it that students are taking with them from my writing course to your writing course to your writing course, and how is that learning being transferred? That's, I think, a question that writing instructors are really wrestling with right now, and that we have a lot to think about. And as I was suggesting a minute ago, we do know that metacognition plays a very key role. The students who are able to talk about themselves as writers, the students who are able to identify practices in writing, who have a language for talking about how to make an evidence-based argument, those are the students who do better than the students who don't have that sort of metacognitive language. And then again, this whole question of the value added, because the transfer question is really a question about value added. When, again, my colleague in sociology says, you know, what did you teach those students in first year writing? It's really a question of what is it that they are able to take with them to transfer from first year writing to every other course that they take across the curriculum. And so I would argue that all of those things are bearing in on writing instruction. So here it is, all together, all of these issues that I've been talking about. And I put this Wordle together because I think they're all interwoven and connected. And that when we think about writing instruction, we can pull pieces out, but ultimately we are talking about a very complicated, interrelated set of issues. So now I hope we can have some conversation.
Well, thank you very much. Would you like to come back? I think that, Anne and Jeer, Nancy Nelson, and David Russell have presented a very interesting overall view of what is happening in writing instruction in the United States. Then maybe we could start a connection with what is happening in Mexico and maybe learn from this experience. Okay, can we start with the questions, please? Tenemos con las preguntas.
Buenas tardes. Voy a preguntar en español. Si me sale. Bien, de lo que habló Angie acerca de la evaluación que está muy conectada con las prácticas de evaluación. Creo que en México estamos viviendo, sobre todo en la educación básica, un fenómeno muy parecido, porque el examen, no sé si ya sepan, el examen que se aplica aquí en las escuelas primarias, el enlace, está condicionando muchas de las prácticas de lectura, de escritura aquí en México. Ya los maestros de estos niveles están preocupados por las evaluaciones que son externas, ni siquiera es una evaluación interna de la institución en la que están trabajando, sino es una evaluación nacional, y que de alguna manera esas evaluaciones están condicionando los recursos, la atención que se le ponga a la institución, etc. Entonces creo que estamos viviendo situaciones muy parecidas y que a pesar de los nuevos enfoques que en el papel están diciendo, en los discursos, que lo que importa son las prácticas, que ellos, la literacidad, estas prácticas nos remiten solamente a poder llenar rituales de enseñanza de lectura y escritura, pero sin realmente enseñar a leer y escribir a los estudiantes. En el comentario.
But it's a comment that I'd like to comment back to. I'm sorry to know that we are facing the same problems, but I think that, and I agree with you. I know teachers whose jobs are on the line who will get fired based on the test scores of their students. That's how dramatic it is right now, and I'm guessing it must be the same here in Mexico. And my response is, we've got to fight back. We cannot allow a generation of kids to grow up as I am now seeing, because I am now getting the first products of No Child Left Behind as first-year university students, because they've been in school for the 12 years that No Child Left Behind has been in effect. And as I say, they are students who are, completely blinkered in their abilities to write. And I do a lot of work with schools at the secondary level and teachers at the secondary level, and I'm constantly trying to help them, and they are very good at being what I would call subversive in a good way, that they are helping their students to prepare for the test, because of course you have to do that or you're going to lose your job, but they don't stop there. And they don't allow the test to limit their vision. And so what I'm trying to constantly do is to figure out ways to support the teachers who are doing that kind of good subversive work, because I think we need.
Well, and I wanted to add that, this is happening in Mexico, it's happening in the United States. The neoliberal, this is going across the world. And in my talk earlier today, I mentioned Norway. We can look at the European countries. They're doing the same assessments. They're deciding on their own forms, but there tends to be a lot of redundancy across countries. But I also wanted to mention something else, and maybe I'm a little hopeful here, but Anne mentioned that Texas had opted out of its core standards. Not for the right reasons, but anyway, it did. But in Texas, where a lot of all of this high-stakes testing started, there is a reform movement that started. Maybe at some point you'll hear about this, but the Texas legislature has signed a bill allowing 20 school districts not to do the high-stakes testing, to focus on 21st century learning, to do all of the good things with technology that we're trying to get them to do, and to really focus on learning rather than preparing for tests. So I'm hopeful with that. I may be a little bit Pollyanna on this, but I'm kind of hopeful that things like this are going to happen and we will get more reasonable in terms of assessment.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, of course.
Can you hear me?
Talk away, David.
David, can you hear us? Oh,
Yes.
yes? Okay.
My comment is this, that the 21st century education that Nancy referred to is an education that will require students to be far more flexible rhetorically in their communication. It will require them to enter a globalized workplace with tremendous diversity of genres, of activities, of communication modes. And if we don't push for a university education that prepares them for that, and a secondary school education that prepares them for university, then we'll be in very big trouble educationally. And it seems to me that even the neoliberal governments of this world can understand that we must prepare students for an information society. And the transition, the one transition that Anne did not mention, that I think is important, and I agree with everything that she said about the totality of it, but it's the transition between university and workplaces and the world. And it is there where writing instruction is proliferating. We're having many kinds of specialized courses, specialized programs, special training in business, government, industry to support students' communication. And if assessment continues to restrict students rather than helping them to expand, then it's going against the 21st century tendency for writing to proliferate and to diversify.
Hear ye. And thanks, David.
Thank you, David. Would you like to comment on that? Or we will not know about it. Yes. ¿Alguna otra pregunta, por favor? ¿Alguna otra pregunta, comentario? Questions, comments?
Bueno, gracias por la oportunidad. Yo me quedo preocupada de escucharles porque ayer y hoy he sentido que tenemos enfrente un problema muy grande en la formación de los estudiantes de la universidad. Parece ser que los profesores de química, derecho, ingeniería, medicina hacen una demanda hacia los especialistas en la lectura y la enseñanza de la escritura, es enséñenlos a leer o enséñenlos a escribir. Y la gente que trabajamos en eso le regresamos la demanda y les decimos, no, eso ya te toca a ti. O sea, ya estamos en un nivel de especialización que te toca a ti. Entonces, ¿cómo hacemos para que los profesores de las diferentes áreas, de las diferentes disciplinas, tomen conciencia de las características de los textos o de las tareas de escritura para las cuales deben de preparar a sus estudiantes? En mi experiencia, el profesor de mi facultad, que es psicología, pues él piensa que se lee y escribe psicología como se lee y escribe derecho y se lee y escribe medicina, pero en los hechos nosotros sabemos que no es así, especialmente cuando alguien llega a la vida laboral. O sea, los géneros ya tienen cualidades muy particulares y creo que tenemos una preocupación muy grande porque escriban géneros académicos, una buena publicación, un buen artículo, pero bueno, al final el medio médico tiene que saber escribir un texto para que una comunidad le entienda que es importante lavarse los dientes, ¿no? O un psicólogo tiene que saber escribir un texto para que el papá entienda porque es importante que se siente con el niño a hacer la tarea. Esa es mi preocupación y quisiera saber lo que ustedes piensan.
David, do you want to take that on first?
No, you go ahead.
Okay, I'll dive in. So I don't think there's a simple answer. You're raising one of the major questions that I think pervades higher education. So I don't think there's a silver bullet single answer, but I think there are multiple answers. One answer, I think, particularly in higher education, in again my context, there's this thing called publish or perish. That is, every professor who wants to keep his or her job has to also be a writer. And so when I encounter people who say, oh, no, I don't know anything about writing, I couldn't possibly help my students in psychology learn how to write, my answer is, excuse me, let me see how many articles you've published, how many books you've published. Let's talk about you as a writer, and let's start from there. And build that, because that's what we all are. As academics, we are all writers, and I refuse to let any of my colleagues forget that. But that's not the whole thing. And that'll maybe open the door. Then I think we do have a job to do around this issue of transfer. I think we haven't been as smart as we could be about helping students to understand what it means to know what developing an argument really means, and to have a language for that, to have a language for how they are going to use evidence in an argument, because many of those kinds of things shift a little bit as you move from psychology to some other field, but they're similar. And so I think the more that we can highlight for ourselves and for our students and for our colleagues, the things that students can transfer, that they can carry with them across disciplines, I think is another strategy. I think a third is to take seriously the notion of faculty development, to assume that not all professors are not all equally good writers, and perhaps would value opportunities to participate in forms of professional development that would both address them as writers, but also help them understand the nature of writing and writing instruction better, so that they're not, in many cases I think my colleagues are honestly a little terrified when they say, no, I can't teach writing. They really mean it, they are sort of terrified. And that's why I start by saying, okay, let's talk about you, the writer, first, because that's safe territory. They know how to do that. And then we can build from there to providing more resources.
And something else to think about, kind of depending on the university where you are, but writing across the curriculum programs. Those have been around for a while. Some of them have worked and some of them haven't. But I was at a university where one really did get started and seemed to be going very well. I left after it got started. Actually, David Russell was a consultant when that was first getting started there. But that was at Louisiana State University, and we had a committee of people from all the different colleges in the university who worked on writing across the curriculum and getting that implemented. We were able to get the provost to buy into this. We were able to convince him that this was something that needed to be done. We brought in David Russell as a consultant and another person as a consultant, to make suggestions about how we go about doing that. We hired a noted scholar in rhetoric and composition, to come be the director of it. And we got students, all the students, undergraduates, starting to develop writing portfolios with pieces of writing that came from their disciplinary classes too. So the faculty got involved in this because the students were producing writing that was going to be read, and this portfolio was going to be something that they were going to have when they graduated. I don't know what's happening with that now because I left LSU, but it did get off to a good start then, and I think there have been a lot of other universities that have been successful with writing across the curriculum program.
Let me speak to that. There is a very good, and you can just Google back clearinghouse and find it. But there are many hundreds of writing across the curriculum or writing in the disciplines programs in the U.S., some more effective than others. And I should also say Canada, and I should also say just beginning in Colombia and other countries. And the most exciting thing about the future of writing instruction institutionally for me is that these writing in the disciplines or writing across the curriculum programs are now, after 30 years, really looking carefully at the level of the department or the curriculum in an individual study program. Instead of, or I should say, in addition to, looking at the individual university teachers in terms of faculty development. We need both. But in some very exciting experiments in the U.S., some of them now more than experiments, universities have created a process by which departments can evaluate and make plans for using writing to enhance their curriculum. And an easy way to look at one of the best ones is to Google University of Minnesota Writing Enhanced Curriculum, the WEC, Writing Enhanced Curriculum. LSU also has a very good one. But the concept is very interesting. If you notice that writing enhanced curriculum, the goal is not to make students better writers per se, although we all hope that happens. The goal rather is to make students better learners in their curriculums and make them better professionals when they leave and go off into the worlds of work after. And that's an interesting conceptual shift, I think, from thinking about writing, good writing, effective writing, however it can be as the end, to thinking about some other end, professional work or societal change or learning in a curriculum as the goal and writing as a means of accomplishing that. And so that's one little point about technology on that. And just in terms of the way concepts of writing can help us rethink things. A very big study of adolescents writing recently, a national study in the U.S., found that adolescents are now writing far, far more than they ever did. They're writing reams and thousands of words and pages. But it's done on social networking sites, it's done in texting, and they don't consider it to be writing. They don't consider it to be writing. So there has to be some kind of conceptual shift for them to see what they're doing day in and day out. Work to do, chances are, when they become professionals, because my professional work is now done in social networking sites, it's done through messaging of all kinds, and see what they're doing as writing. And similarly, I think, as Anne said, and Anne wrote one of the first, and I still think one of the best books on writing across the curriculum, Roots in the Sawdust, that writing can be a tool for learning, for thinking, for reading, for all kinds of things. But we need to reconceptualize writing and think of it more in terms of the social actions, the social activities that go on where writing is a part of things. Yes, definitely. Writing across the curriculum, writing disciplines, a very exciting trend for the future, writing instruction, particularly if departments begin to think of it as a way for them, as a group, to reconceptualize what they're doing and improve what they're doing.
Thank you, David. ¿Alguna otra pregunta? ¿Comentario?
Buenas tardes. Pues yo creo que yo puedo comentar mucho sobre la dificultad para escribir. No me considero que sea la única, creo que somos una gran mayoría los que tenemos esas dificultades, tanto en nuestro país como ahora escucho en el país de las ponentes también. Pero creo que también una guía con un tutor capacitado que nos enseñe a organizar la información, a tratar de escribir, de expresar nuestras propias ideas, de recuperar información, nos saca adelante, definitivamente. Pero empezar desde la infancia creo que ayudaría bastante para llegar al momento en que ya tenemos cosas que decir, que ya hemos podido obtener información y habiendo trabajado las herramientas necesarias desde la infancia para poderlo expresar. Y que sí es necesario en cada carrera una especialización de acuerdo a los temas, pero haber trabajado previamente por medio de la lectura, desarrollando sus habilidades, para que podamos decirlo y puedan irse eliminando. Tenemos mucho que hacer y yo creo que trabajar en conjunto desde la primaria, la secundaria y llegando a las facultades también, todos en equipo, tenemos una parte que hacer, capacitación, los nuevos que nos estamos especializando, dejarnos guiar por los que ya tienen esa información, nada más.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I agree entirely. I think you're exactly right. We need to work together from kindergarten through graduate school and to see ourselves engaged in the common enterprise. Thank you.
I would just add that these young children have much to say, and I don't think we have to wait for them to read a lot and learn a lot. young children, they develop their writing when they're developing their reading and when they're developing their oral language. And there's some research that shows that young children have kind of an urge to write even before they learn to read. So I think we need to foster that development across the lifespan. We're all, and Anne said this earlier, we're all learning to write throughout our whole lives. But we start when we're little, when we do the scribbling and we do the drawings, that we consider to be writing. And so I think fostering that throughout the lifespan will help us get to the point, where you want people to be when they get to college and beyond the workforce.
David, did you want to add something?
Yes, I may. Deborah Grant has a wonderful book called Literate Lives in America, and it traces the life history of writing that several dozen people did over their lifetimes. And it's amazing to read and see how dramatically the writing changed across the course of these people's lives, and how they learned to do it differently in different places, in churches, in schools, in workplaces, in labor unions, in many different places. And this lifespan view, exactly, you are absolutely right. The questioner is absolutely right. This is what is necessary, to take a whole view of the tremendous diversity of reading and writing. And I want to say, while I have a chance, that one of the great losses in the United States historically was that reading and writing have been separated. They've been separated in terms of professional organizations, they've been separated in terms of research, and it's only through the wonderful efforts of people like Nancy Nelson that we have some dialogue going on. And here in Latin America, when I talk to people from Latin America, in the 4 countries that I visited, they always link reading and writing. They always link reading and writing, and I think that is a tremendous advantage and something to build on and ask, because in the 21st century, unlike literacy in previous centuries, and Deb Brandt makes this point, that in order to participate in society, economically, politically, even as a consumer on the internet, one has to not only read but write. So it will be a requirement for active citizenship in the future.
Thank you, David. ¿Algún otro comentario o pregunta? ¿Sí? David, can you please repeat the name of the title of the book?
Literacy in American Lives. I'm sorry. David, I'll just say it. Literacy in American Lives, and the author is Deborah Brandt, B-R-A-N-D-T.
¿Alguien más? ¿Algún otro comentario? ¿Pregunta? Bueno, creo que surgieron temas de reflexión y es siempre interesante ver a gente que ha estado, que tiene la experiencia, que tienen los tres ponentes. Ellos han participado en múltiples proyectos de lectura y escritura, y no solamente proyectos de investigación, sino también proyectos en las universidades y en las escuelas. Entonces, muchas gracias a todos y ya nos toca la próxima conferencia.